So I thought I'd share with you the story of when I first got to canter on a horse. And I love this story because it just speaks to the moment when I really found joy in horses, and I knew that I was hooked from that moment on. So when I was young, my family and I, we lived in Greece. We lived there for 5 years. I went to elementary school there, and when I was young, my mother leased a horse out at a barn in the suburbs of Athens. And I used to go out there with her all the time. And I started to get really hooked onto being at the barn and walking around the stables and looking at all the horses and watching everybody ride. And my mom's friend let me start to ride her horse. His name was Rentley. And he was a little black pony. And I think he was a pony, or he might have been a very small horse. But I remember at that young age, at 5 years old, thinking that I was invincible. I thought, I can take a horse out into a field and just canter by myself, no problem. In the meantime, I didn't even know how to trot, so I had pushed the goal really far right away. But I had kept bugging my mom about cantering. I was obsessed with the idea of cantering. And finally, her and her friend took me out, and we were out on the king's estate in Greece, which are the old estate for the king in Greece. All the lands are preserved there. And I remember being out on the pony, and they said, okay, there was this beautiful dirt path with pine trees lining along the path. So it was really enclosed. There was only one way to go, and it was forward. And they said, we want you to halt here. We're going to walk ahead down the path. And when we call you, we want you to put your inside leg here and your outside leg here. We want you to just give them a little squeeze and a tap with your legs in that position. And I thought, okay, yeah, I'm ready. And they walked off, and I couldn't see them because there was a little bend in the dirt path. And I remember for a second thinking, oh gosh, what am I doing? What did I get myself into? And they called me, and I was like, okay, here we go. And I asked them to walk off, and I had no clue in that moment what would happen when I asked that horse to canter. I had no idea what it would feel like, what it would sound like, how fast I would go, if I would stay on. But the cool thing about it is that none of that mattered. None of that was on my radar. I put my legs into the position, I squeezed, I gave a tap. He stepped up into canter beautifully, and we cantered all the way down the path, around the curve, up to my mom and her friend. And I will never forget that moment, because in that moment I had a smile so big on my face that I could not wipe it off. It was like the kid that's just going on the roller coaster, just super, super happy. And the smile was so genuine, and the feeling of joy was so genuine, that I know that was the moment that I was hooked onto horses. I knew that I was going to be in this forever. And so that first step into canter, and someone pointed out to me, I did a podcast with Let Freedom Rein, and while we were on the podcast, Jason Swick had pointed out to me how cool it was, and even for me to remind myself of this, how cool it was that I let myself step into that vulnerability without knowing what the consequences would be. Today, I'm much older. I've worked with horses now for a while. I know that sometimes when a horse goes into canter, it's not necessarily going to be a nice rhythmic canter. There's a lot of things that could happen. But as a young girl, I just trusted. I just said, let's go. And I didn't know what was going to happen. So that was important for me when we were doing that podcast, to remind me that when I was really young, I did that, and I can do that again in my life now, and so can you. Sometimes you can step into the vulnerability of something and just have this joyous, positive attitude as you step in, and trust that things will work out. It's better to experience things anyway than to hold yourself back, and to hold yourself back with the what ifs, and hold yourself back with fear and anxiety. So I thought I'd share that story, not only as a story of me and my life and my journey, but of something that I think we all need to be reminded of. And maybe you want to think back to when you first started with horses. What was the moment you got hooked, or you got latched on to horses, or fell in love with horses? And whenever you're going through your day now, and maybe things are getting hard for you, or things aren't going right, or you're having a difficult time, think back to that moment, that specific moment. Maybe there's a few moments of when you knew that you fell in love with horses. What was that moment? And try and connect with that as an adult or as an older person now in everything that you do every day with your horse. It'll help bring the joy back into it. It'll help bring the passion back into what you're doing, and help motivate you and inspire you to keep on going no matter what.